Hello, everybody, and welcome to the March 2022 Carnegie Lecture, hosted by the History Center of San Luis Obispo County. We are incredibly happy to have an extremely distinguished speaker who we will introduce. We will have a friend, a long-standing member of our community and longtime friend of the speaker introduce in just a moment. I just wanted to take a moment at the beginning here to welcome everybody to the Carnegie Lecture. This is a quarterly series that we at the History Center have been doing since September of 2019, which was the 250th anniversary of the Portola expedition, which is as great an opportunity to start a project as anything. This recording will be available on our website, historycenterslo.org. I would love it if anybody had any questions that they would submit those in the chat box. We will have time for questions at the end. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to switch to speaker view so you get to see our speakers instead of the entire grid of your fellow participants. And between the speech and our question period, I know John Ashbaugh always likes to take that time, our board president likes to take that time to update the audience on what events we've got coming up. So I think this is going to be a very fascinating question. I will encourage everybody to mute yourselves if you're not an active participant, just in case the phone rings or the doorbell goes. You don't disturb everybody else. But with that, sufficient ado, I will hand the baton over to the two Johns, who will arrange to introduce our amazing speaker tonight, Dan Sebby.
Yeah, John, Via, our treasurer here, is going to introduce Dan, and after Dan finishes, we'll do the Q&A, and I'll pick up a few notes here about some of the things we have in our bookstore and so on. So, John Via, take it away. You know him better than anybody.
Well, good evening, everybody. My name is John Via. I'm a local businessman in town, and my family's been members of the History Center for a long time, and I've known Dan Sebby a long time. We went to high school together. We graduated, and I still remember having Dan in PE class and stuff like that. Dan did everything. He would never cause trouble. Not like, he did. His Portuguese blood didn't come out very much, but he was very mellow, and he did everything right. And he's done a great job out at the county. I get his emails. I'm on Facebook with a guy, and he's very, very, very active in the history of Camp San Luis, and it's pretty amazing what it's done. And Dan is the oldest, probably one of the oldest ranging members of the National Guard, and we are lucky to have him. We are I just told John, told me he was number one. So
no senior.
So without further ado, Dan Sebby.
Okay, thanks a lot, John. It's good to see you again. Yes, I am a fourth generation San Luis Obispo. I am from one of the older Portuguese ranching families, the Machados. You're known for shooting zebras. You're running booths in Spooner's Cove. My grandfather almost killed Murray Hathaway. Yeah, I'm one of those Machados. But I think I got enough of the Norwegian mix from my dad that I didn't get the bad genes from the family. So what we're going to do tonight is talk about the history of California during the Second World War with an emphasis on Camp San Luis Obispo and the related military activities in the county. Let me get the screen up here. And can everybody see that? Okay. So what happened in San Luis Obispo started well before the war, and this is what's leading up to the war. So we had the establishment of Hamilton Field up in San Rafael, the upgrading of March Field, modernization of the fleet, which involved the shipyards in San Francisco, Long Beach, Los Angeles. But in San Luis Obispo in 1937, we had the Fourth Army maneuvers. And this included all the National Guard of the Southwest and the regular Army from Presidio Monterey, Presidio of San Francisco, and Fort Lewis. And the maneuver area was the entire county of San Luis Obispo. There was Air Corps flying out of San Luis Obispo and McChesney Field. It was a huge event. This was the third time that this had happened. Before World War I, there was some huge maneuvers in Atascadero, but this was even bigger than that. If you look at the pictures of the time, they had anti-aircraft guns on the lawn in front of what is now Atascadero City Hall. They were running tanks on the Napomo Mesa. There was field artillery hiding in the brush on the mesa. The whole county, the western part of the county, was the battle box, as we say. There was also the establishment of new and the expansion of existing installations. So Giggling Range became Camp Ord, later Fort Ord. And then the Army took over the National Guard's camps, Camp Miriam, which became Camp San Luis Obispo, and Camp McQuaid in Watsonville, which was a Coast Artillery training camp. Both of these were established in 1928 and had served the National Guard well up until World War II. So we talked about the big Fourth Army maneuvers. This was a big deal. They had a series of these maneuvers rotating across the United States for each Army area, and there were 4 Army areas. And so all the defense attaches from Washington, D.C. would come out. This is the most interesting one of the German military attaché, German Wehrmacht Major General, who came out to observe the exercise. Now, that's kind of surreal because this is from the 159th Infantry Regiment, who later fought in the Battle of the Bulge. We have Colonel Wayne Allen. The middle has the regimental commander and his executive officer, whose name escapes me right now, but he later went on to be a major general. So in 1940-41, it was obvious we were going to war. So they started mobilizing the National Guard, started the draft, and things started to move really quick. So in the California National Guard, the 40th Infantry Division, which numbered in peacetime about 9,000, mobilized at Camp San Luis Obispo. Camp San Luis Obispo was built for the 40th Infantry Division, which is still an active division of the California Army National Guard. It went from 9,000 to 15,000, and Camp San Luis also, by the end of the war, could have housed 22,000 soldiers. 8 combat divisions went through there. The final one being the 104th Timberwolf Division that came from Germany. They were preparing to go fight in the Pacific, but the war ended while they were here at Camp San Luis Obispo. The 251st Coast Artillery went to Camp Seaside, which is the Ventura County Fairground. They went to Camp Malacone in Barbers Point. And as a bit of trivia, the first 3 people killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor were 3 members from Battery F of the 251st, which was from Long Beach. They decided to get up early that morning, went over to John Brown Field, which was the airport adjacent to their camp. They rented an airplane to fly around the island. And before the Japanese they ran into the Japanese attack force before making landfall. So you got a little cloth-covered, passenger plane versus an entire air wing from an aircraft carrier. It was a pretty one-sided fight. The 250th Regiment mobilized at their camp at Camp McQuaid up in Watsonville, and they went on to Alaska and later Europe. The 40th Tank Company from Salinas mobilized, went to Fort Lewis and then to Fort Stotzenburg in the Philippine Islands, which later became Clark Air Force Base. This unit was fought on Bataan, and only about 25% of the unit returned to Salinas at the end of the war because of the Bataan Death March and subsequent imprisonment. And then the 144th Field Artillery from Santa Barbara went to Fort Lewis and took part in the D-Day landings and fighting in Northern Europe. California formed the State Guard to replace the National Guard, and it consisted of ground, air, and naval elements. And the air element predates the formation of the Civil Air Patrol, and the naval element lasted until an invasion threat was eliminated after Midway. So this shows the headquarters company of the 159th Infantry from San Jose, Oakland, and San Francisco arriving at Camp San Luis Obispo. All those buildings are still standing at Camp San Luis Obispo. Notice the streets are not paved. And when they were building Camp San Luis Obispo, they had torrential rains, like we've never seen, probably until the 60s when downtown flooded. And they said when they were tearing down the huts, they found places where just layers and layers and layers of duck boards that they sink in the mud. They just put another duck board on top of it. It was like 6 layers deep. That's how muddy it was at Camp San Luis. So you can see these guys are still wearing their campaign hats. They had just gotten issued the standard Army uniform, but they're still carrying old 1903 rifles. Their helmets were still the World War I doughboy helmet. So we were still very equipped with a lot of World War I equipment. The field artillery was still using the French 75s from World War I, although they changed out the horses for trucks in the late 30s. But still, it was all a lot of World War I equipment. This is the mobilization of the State Guard at the Santa Anita racetrack. All told, there was about 70,000 Californians volunteered for volunteer service with the State Guard. Before Pearl Harbor, they had 9 infantry regiments, a quartermaster regiment, support regiments, 10 air wings, a couple of naval divisions, which is a company. But within 2 weeks of Pearl Harbor, it expanded into 4 more infantry regiments. And some of these regiments were so overmanned that they had reserve companies that would hold people until a spot opened up into an operational company. So you had a company a regiment that was organized for 1,500 may have had up to 2,500 soldiers in it when you counted the reserves waiting for a slot to get into the operational companies. So California felt really threatened, and there was a very good reason. Pearl Harbor. This particular ship is the USS California, the only battleship built on the West Coast, and it was later raised and taken to Bremerton, where it was modernized and continued to fight later in the war. So it was a very historic ship. We have a scrap of the Japanese Zero that hit it in the Battle of Lingayen Gulf during the invasion of the Philippines. The ship's bell is at Capitol Park here in Sacramento. So again, another close tie to California. Its nickname was the Prune Barge. Okay, here's a picture of the 251st Coast Artillery just before the war started, training on their World War I era 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. And of course, the 40th Tank Company at Patton. This shows one of their tanks charging a Japanese roadblock. If you ever visit Camp San Luis Obispo, we've recreated this famous painting. We actually have, we took 5 Stuart tanks that were range targets at Camp Roberts and made one good tank. And then we got a 47 millimeter anti-tank gun from the Army, and they built the memorial to the 40th Tank Company. And that's on the mall here at Camp San Luis Obispo. So, and there were attacks. A lot of people don't know that one of the reasons that there was a panic in California was there was a lot of attacks. This lists all the attacks on shipping in California waters. And some of these you can still see. If you go up to Crescent City, you can see the hulk of the tanker Amidio in the surf at Crescent City. One of these, the Story, I believe, was a lumber ship that took 2 torpedoes but didn't sink. The Japanese couldn't figure out why it didn't sink. Well, it was a lumber ship. the lumber kept it afloat, and they were able to beach it at Furman Point, just off of Fort MacArthur. And of course, anyone who spent any time here in San Luis Obispo knows about the SS Montebello, the ship that was torpedoed off of Cambria, somewhere between Cayucas and Cambria. It's sitting in about, I believe, 500 feet of water. They said it hadn't shown any deterioration, but in the past few years it is. I think Cal Poly was trying to figure out a way to remove the oil because it had just taken on a full load of oil at Port San Luis, and we're heading to the refineries up in Richmond. And then, of course, what really put California into a panic was the shelling of the Elwood oil fields in Goleta. So this is a Japanese propaganda postcard that shows Santa Barbara on fire. They fired 18 rounds, did tens of dollars worth of damage. Somewhere, I think there was an accountant in the Japanese Admiralty that figured out, okay, you expended this much ammunition and only did this much damage, but it was a psychological blow to the United States. Now, to show you what the actual damage was, that's it. They overshot the oil fields. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a bigger target, and they missed all 18 times. They put them in the hills across Highway 1. They put them in open fields. Didn't hit. They hit the pier once, and the shell just went right through the pier and exploded, but only did about, at the most, $100 worth of damage. So psychologically, militarily, an absolute disaster. Psychologically, very successful. And then in California, later in the war, they had the Fugo balloon attacks. And there are 25 known attacks in California. A lot of them were shot down by, for some reason, they flew near Chico, and they were able to shoot a lot of them down from Chico Army Airfield. At one point, it's thought that 75% of the forest fires west of Wisconsin were caused by these fires, but they had kept it so secret, the Japanese didn't know how successful they were. They did create a lot of forest fires. The only people they killed was after the war, when a family in Oregon found one of these bombs, and they tried to handle it, and it killed a family in Oregon who were on picnic. But these may still be out there in the Sierras or anywhere in the West. We don't know. Japanese ordnance has a reputation of the older it gets, the more unstable it gets. When I took a explosives ordnance disposal reconnaissance course, which is just a course that recognizes what it is so you can tell the bomb disposers what it is, they told us that sometimes even the temperature change from a shadow set these off. That's how unstable they are. But they were made out of rice paper, and they were very, very accurate. They got where they wanted to go, these things to go, Western Canada and the Western United States, to destroy the timber industry. As a result, there was a lot of we have the internment of the Japanese in California, a lot of them from California. We all know the stories about the Californians, the Japanese from the San Luis Obispo area. This is an example where they usually went to racetracks and fairgrounds and converted them into, these were assembly camps, and then they were moved to purpose-built internment camps, such as Tule Lake or Manzanar. This is the camp that was made at the Santa Anita racetrack in Orange County, LA County. And they were only there for 3 months before they got the camps, permanent camps built. And then these were turned over to the Army as barracks, Santa Anita becoming an ordnance training center. The nearest ones to San Luis Obispo would have been Salinas or Fresno. Yeah, this shows where all the temporary camps, they were called assembly centers. So you can see where all these camps were. And all of these camps became Army or Army Air Forces camps afterwards for training. Then there were 10 centers for permanent relocation, all west of the Mississippi. But what a lot of people don't know is that the Department of Justice had 20 camps west of the Mississippi for interning Germans, Italians, and other access citizens. And these were in California, these were at Frazier Park up in the San Francisco Bay Area and Tuna Canyon in Los Angeles County. This is a story that is not told very often. California became a major industrial center. This is one of the things that launched the aircraft industry in California, which was already started and had a good hold, but this just made it, industry on steroids. You can see anything that were flown by the Americans and supplied to the British or the other Commonwealth and imperial countries. A lot of it was built here in California. Same with the shipyards. You had Marin ship, Cal ship, Kaiser, Mare Island Naval Shipyard, Long Beach Naval Shipyard. They built tanks at the Ford Motor Company in Richmond. Also Jeeps. Women started, this is the first time women went into the industrial workforce. The Rosie the Riveter. This is a Time Life book showing a female welder working in one of the shipyards with a cutting torch. This is a Marin ship in Sausalito, where they were building Liberty and later Victory ships, not to mention warships. It has a stunt. They pre-positioned a lot of the equipment, and they actually built one of the Liberty ships in a day, a single day. And it wasn't very good. They launched it and then immediately put it back into dry dock to make all the repairs that it needed. They were building these things so fast that some of these Liberty ships didn't make it across the Atlantic. They fell apart in the middle of the Atlantic. And then they were replaced by the more substantial Victory ships. Okay, this is Lockheed in one of the aircraft factories. This is at Lockheed in Burbank, just before the war. And this is the same building later. One of the great advantages we had in California was Hollywood. They had all the set designers build this city over the factories so that this is the exact same building, taken roughly the same direction. But if you were flying a reconnaissance aircraft, you would not have, if you're doing a high-speed run, you would not have recognized this as not being a semi-suburban area in Los Angeles County. You're probably trying, where the hell's the airport? They actually covered the runway with burlap and fake trees. Now, there were some strife. Just before the war, the machinists went on strike. Well, this was like 6 months before Pearl Harbor, and we're trying to gear up the war effort. And, the Union decided to go on strike. Well, Franklin Roosevelt didn't like that and ordered the Army to take charge of the aircraft plants. So here we have a full infantry regiment from Fort Lewis, Washington, standing out in front of North American Aviation in Inglewood. Now, an infantry regiment, regular Army infantry regiment at this time was about 1,500 soldiers. Notice that they're there with their 18-inch long bayonets on the end of their rifles. You can see a highway patrolman here, and probably some local police here. And they're not shown in this picture, but they actually did set up 30 caliber water-cooled machine guns. And it put an end to the strike fairly quick. It made it very clear, we're not going to tolerate, this is a state of emergency, we're not going to tolerate any strikes. Now, some of the things that came out of the war effort was family housing for employees. This is where, for those of us who've worked for the state or other government agencies, this is where Kaiser Permanente started. At the Kaiser shipyards, Kaiser built family housing. The hospitals that supported the shipyards are now what is known as the Kaiser Permanente hospital system. These houses are still in Oakland near the port, but you can see there were sixplexes for families, and there was a lot of turnover. And fortunately, Henry Kaiser was smart enough to do. Everyone wanted to work for Kaiser because he could at least try to get you into some sort of stable housing. In Los Angeles, that didn't work. They didn't have that. So you had Little Tokyo taken over by a lot of the minority shipyard workers, and Little Tokyo became Bronzeville in Los Angeles. And I mean, it was like living in Manhattan today. You know, people were renting closet space just to have a place to put their mattress, so they could have some place to sleep before they go back to their next 12-hour shift at the shipyard or the aircraft plant. A lot of turnover because a lot of these guys just couldn't handle it, so they try to find other work in less demanding jobs, or they got drafted. And then they left their war work job, they got drafted too. So let's talk about famous Californians. Some of these are pretty obvious. George Patton from San Marino, born and raised there. If you go down to the Episcopal Church in San Marino, they have the Patton window. This is the church that he was raised in. For those of you who know California history, his grandfather was Juan Benito Wilson, who Mount Wilson is named after. Jimmy Doolittle was from Alameda and Monterey. Chester Nimitz, although born in Texas, considered San Francisco his home. He commanded the ROTC at Cal. He's buried in Colma. Hap Arnold was from Sonoma. In fact, if you go to Sonoma, there is an Arnold real estate office. It's his granddaughter's real estate business. Of course, Hollywood, you had John Ford, Frank Capra, who were famous directors, went to work producing documentaries and morale films. Jimmy Stewart, who could have gotten an easier job, chose not to, and got assigned to a frontline bomber wing, ending up commanding a B-17 wing, and he later retired in the 60s as a brigadier general, and he actually took part in during his 2-week active duty in the reserves, he actually flew a bomber mission over Vietnam. Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, who was actually in the Army in the 30s. He joined the Army Reserve in the 30s as a augmentee to the 11th Cavalry Regiment at the Presidio of Monterey. So that's why he learned to ride a horse in the Army. And if you remember his funeral, they had the riderless horse. They actually used where they put the boots in the stirrups backwards. Those were his actual boots he wore while he was a cavalry officer before he became an officer in the Army Air Corps. Jackie Robinson, hundreds of actors, directors, producers. They actually formed a unit in Hollywood to do nothing but do morale and training films. But what they did also was come up with a way, all the set designers and landscape designers came up with a system by using a gantry system for a camera where they would take aerial photographs that were taken from Britain, fly them to Hollywood, and they would recreate these aerial photographs in 3D. Some of these were like huge 3D models of going into an attack on a certain site. And they would put the trees and the telephone poles and the buildings and the power plants and their target And then with a gantry system, they had a camera go fly the mission. And as they took the film, they would point out hazards that you look out for. Look out for these chimneys from this power plant. You want to watch out for those. And then fly the mission as if it was from an aircraft. And Ronald Reagan narrated a lot of these. They said they could take it when they got a film, the pictures from the reconnaissance flights. They could have this film ready for an attack briefing in 7 to 10 days back at the wing that was going to conduct the mission. We actually have a piece of these. They were like 6x6 panels that they could rearrange depending on which way you were going, which axis of attack you were going to fly. But they kept them all because in case they had to go rebomb the same place again. Again, pictures of famous, you have Nimitz, Arnold, Patton, and Doolittle. But these are some of the other ones, Henry Fonda. Hollywood did have a lot of people who actually flew combat missions. Some did the USO thing, but some of them actually, Clark Gable did his one mission over Germany. But there was a lot of people who actually flew combat missions. And of course, Ronald Reagan, this is before he joined the Air Corps, he was still a cavalry officer, but apparently he was blind as a bat. There was no way they were going to he wanted to lead a cavalry troop, even though his unit still had horses, but there was no way they were going to send horses over and not with a half blind troop commander. This is, now we're going to talk about state government. This is Herbert Olson lobbying Congress for the internment of the Japanese. He was the governor of California when the war broke out. A devout racist, there's nothing. He did form the State Guard to help calm the fears of invasion. So there is a lot of, he's not well thought of, and he was replaced by the very popular and progressive Earl Warren. So this is Earl Warren with the commanding general of the 13th Armored Division at Camp Beale, now Beale Air Force Base. And he decided to make the 13th Armored California's own. So they gave him a parade, let him ride in the tank. But where Cuthbert Olson never left the Capitol building, Earl Warren was everywhere. He was all over the state. Here he is in Inglewood talking to a couple of the female ordnance workers on the P-51 production line. He was everywhere. And then on the home front, there was a real thought that the Japanese were going to attack West Coast. And they did have an operation plan for that. We've seen that the Japanese had submarines in California waters. But what a lot of people don't know is the Japanese had a very specific type of submarine that could carry, at this time, one aircraft. And there was what they called the Great Battle of Los Angeles, where all of a sudden, all the air defenses were activated. Someone was flying over Los Angeles that shouldn't have been. And it coincided with the sinking of the ships near Los Angeles. Although it can't be proven because they didn't shoot the plane down, it's thought that the aircraft flying over Los Angeles was the plane from one of these submarines that was doing photo reconnaissance at night. Because people really didn't take the serious. Some people didn't take the serious about how you're supposed to have everything blacked out. In fact, in the East Coast, they had a problem where any ship coming out of New York Harbor was backlit from the city lights, and the German subs would just torpedo commercial shipping as it came out of New York Harbor. This is showing civil defense volunteers in Riverside in 1941. Everyone wanted to get involved. This is Rita Hayworth saying that she's She's pulling off the chrome bumpers for her car, from her, very nice car to give to the war effort. But in reality, 5 minutes after this picture was taken, they were putting the bumpers back on. This shows a California State Guardsman who is guarding the Golden Gate Bridge. The Red Cross was very good about supporting the guys who were out guarding the California's infrastructure. They made sure they drove by to make sure that they had coffee. Again, you can see the World War I helmet, the M1917 Remington with the 18-inch long bayonet. Again, they were thought there was going to be saboteurs or an out-and-out invasion in 41, 42. This says it pretty well. Air raid warden and someone with their lights on. The Civil Air Patrol was formed. Very different from the Civil Air Patrol today. Again, it was a volunteer organization, and private pilots used their aircraft but they were actually conducting reconnaissance missions along the coast, looking for Japanese submarines or any landing parties. They also pulled target tugs for anti-aircraft units because the Air Force maybe didn't have enough pilots, so they get a Civil Air Patrol pilot to, tug, be a tug for a orange sleeve that was 200 feet behind their aircraft that the anti-aircraft guns would shoot at. Volunteers, and of course the women were involved in this too. Female pilots flew the same missions. And on the East Coast, there's a Civil Air Patrol unit that's credited for sinking a submarine. They actually did carry small depth charges or bombs. This shows the Aircraft Control Center in Los Angeles. So these are all tracking individual aircraft. You can see they're all wired to telephones, and everything had to be identified. If they couldn't identify it, they had ground observers calling in. And if something wasn't identified, they'd fly an intercept mission with Army Air Forces, or if Army Air Forces weren't there, they used Navy aircraft if they were near a naval air station. Rationing. Not only were we feeding our people and our Army and our armed forces, we were also feeding Britons. Britain was, alone. So we were trying to feed two countries. Canada was doing the same thing. And you would be given so many points for a week. So you had to juggle the math, figure out what can I get for my points. So each of these have a, for instance, this canned, looks like lily juice or something, 20 cents, and it was 8 points. This canned good here was 15 cents and 14 points. So, it all depended on how scarce it was. The more scarce it was, it cost more points. It may not have cost much in money, but you had to have the points to back the money up. Recycling is nothing new. This is what happened. Nitrates from bacon grease was used for explosives. So things like bacon grease were highly sought after to be recycled because it could be used in the production of ammunition. Of course, anything aluminum, steel was all recycled. Old war trophies from World War I, the Civil War, were all pulled out of parks and cemeteries and sent to be remelted down and made into new aircraft, ships, weapons, whatever the military needed. Prisoners of war. There were two prisoner of war interrogation centers. One at Fort McDowell on Angel Island, where this particular one was located where the immigration center was and is. If you go by to the immigration center, you can see some of the Army buildings that are left over from the prisoner of war center. And senior officers were sent to the resort at Byron Hot Springs. And they were treated pretty good. They were given cigarettes, they were given good food, they were given wine. What the German officers didn't know was that every room was bugged. And they got a lot of information by just being friendly and talkative. And they'd talk back or they'd go back to their room and talk to their roommate. What did you see? It never occurred to them that we would bug their rooms. And they did. They got a lot of information that way. There were 21 prisoner of war base camps, usually at large army camps. And these were anywhere from 250 to 2,000 prisoners of war. These were Camp Cook, which is now Vandenberg Space Force Base, had a 2,000 man prisoner of war camp, mostly Italians and Germans. Very few Japanese made it to a prisoner of war camp because they would kill themselves first before being captured. These were the ones, these were in close confinement, and trustees were allowed to work on the post for pay, but they were screened very closely. And there were at least 45 temporary branch camps with 250 to 500 prisoners, and these provided low-cost labor to farmers in the Central Valley, minimum security, more to keep the cows out than the prisoners in. A lot of these prisoners, especially the Italians, said that they were treated better as prisoners by our army than they were treated as soldiers in their army. One of the things that happened was the Italians were, like their NCOs and officers, were all treated equal. Although the officers were housed separately, the sergeants were treated just the same as the privates. They didn't want them organizing. So there was basically it was a lot of these, some of the privates would get even with their sergeants. But what happened in 1943 was Italy switched sides. They joined the Allies, and all of a sudden 45,000 Italians, 90% of them who were held here in the United States, went from being prisoners of war to members of Italian service units that provided quartermaster, ordnance, and engineer support to Army installations. At Camp San Luis Obispo, we had a ordnance light equipment maintenance company and a heavy equipment maintenance company. The 15th Italian ordnance light maintenance company built a monument. They had a sculptor in their units. And that can be seen on the mall at Camp San Luis Obispo. They worked in the big warehouse at the front of the post, building 754, and also in the post ordnance maintenance shop at the back of the post, keeping trucks repaired and freeing up American soldiers to go be deployed overseas. Now, when they formed these units, they gave all the Italian officers and sergeants their rank back and authority back. And these guys remembered, hey, Private Giuseppe, come here. Remember what you told me 2 months ago? Well, guess who's going to be cleaning toilets for the next year on top of your regular duties? So there was a come to Jesus meeting between the prisoners. These units were commanded by Americans, but they pretty much let the Italian leadership handle the troop leadership program. And a lot of these units, especially the automotive maintenance units, they were soldiers who had worked for Fiat or some of the other Italian automotive companies. And you can see that these are a bunch of German prisoners of war at one of the prisoner of war camps in the valley. You can see they had their own bar. Because they were paid when they worked. And usually the ones that were working in the agricultural field, they'd flood these farms with these prisoners, and they gave them a really low quota of apples to pick or oranges to pick. So if you were fast, you were done by noon. So what did you do the rest of the day? You went back to the camp, got a beer, and you went and played soccer all afternoon. Or then you saw the movie that they would bring in, made sure that they kept there was a concerted effort to keep the prisoners happy, and that would keep, and it did work. The prisoners didn't. There was a big breakout in Arizona at the camp in Phoenix, but in California, first of all, you're on the west coast of the United States. It's a long way back to Germany, so they figured, hey, we got 3 hots and a cot, we got beer, we play soccer, we get some sunshine. Hey, life's good, you know. And they were a lot of these prisoners came back after the war. Of course, there's always the story I heard growing up that one of the Italian prisoners, because when the Italians became service troops, they had all the rights and privileges of a U.S. soldier. So they could go into town to the Fremont Theater and watch a movie. Well, I heard the same story, I don't know if it was true, about one of the Italian prisoners of war running into his cousin who has been telling everybody, no, I'm Swiss Italian. No, I'm not from Italy, I'm from Switzerland. Well, he got busted by his cousin. Don't know if it's true, but that's one of the local San Luis Obispo legends. They were allowed to the Army supplied them with musical instruments, and they were allowed to form bands, orchestras, and you can see everyone's got all their uniforms. You know, you can see the piano player with PW stenciled on his butt. But you had to be clearly identified as you were a prisoner. And it wasn't uncommon to see them still wearing their German Army or German Air Force or Italian Army uniforms with the swastikas on it. In fact, if a soldier died, a prisoner died, they buried him with military honors, which included putting the flag of our enemy on their coffin. Again, this is the living conditions of the Italian service troops at the Benicia Arsenal. Again, identical to what American soldiers were wearing. They're wearing the American uniform with the big green Italy patch on the sleeves. You can see these guys are reading letters from home. Standard Army issue uniform, standard Army issue bed, foot locker. They got carpet. I could probably say with a great deal of certainty that their living quarters in an Italian Army barracks was not this good. Then we had victory. This is George Patton. At the end of the war, before the end of the taking part in the victory bond drive in downtown Los Angeles. Again, Patton being a California. It was party time. This is taken in downtown San Francisco on VJ Day. It looked like the fleet was in. I only see 2 soldiers and a whole lot of sailors. This was at Fort McDowell on Angel Island. Because you had to go by Angel Island to get to the port of Oakland, where they discharged in Camp Stoneman, where the Army was. This is where they offloaded them to be out processed of the Army when coming back from the Pacific. So this sign was a huge sign that they put on Angel Island to welcome the soldiers back. Okay, this is an interesting picture. This is, again, Governor Earl Warren with the leadership of the California National Guard. We have Curtis O'Sullivan, who was the incoming adjutant general, General Hervey, who was the division artillery commander for the 40th Division. This is when all the National Guard units received their colors back from the ending federal service, and they were given back to the state of California when they started their reforming of the National Guard in 1946. This was taken on Veterans Day. What you see here is what is called the Togo Eagle. It was a part of a memorial at the Japanese Naval Academy in South Korea, what is now South Korea. This was on top of the flagpole, and it was a war trophy that the 40th Infantry Division from California brought back from their occupation of Southern Korea at the end of World War II. And we still have this in our collection. It's on display at the 40th Division headquarters at Los Alamitos. It was on a post in front of the CSTI complex at Camp San Luis Obispo until one of the division commanders thought it looked better at his headquarters, and in the middle of the night had it removed and taken down to Los Alamitos. I will not mention names, but the Japanese, when they realized it, this was one of the memorials to Admiral Togo, who defeated the Russian fleet during the Japanese-Russian War in 1905. The aftermath, this is Earl Warren speaking at the formation of the United Nations at the War Memorial Opera House in San Francisco. The United Nations was formed here in California. And you can see the flags of all the members and all the various service members. This course building is still the Opera House in San Francisco. The Veterans Administration grew by leaps and bounds. You had the GI Bill of Rights that allowed people who could not go to university to go to college. You know, and all of a sudden, this exploded the UC and the California State Universities and junior colleges, community colleges, where we went from high school sharing, like in San Luis Obispo, the high school and the junior college shared the same building. Now in '63, you had Cuesta. Now you got Cuesta North and Paso Robles. Yeah, it expanded higher education like nothing ever. But one of the problems was when the soldiers came back, the demographics of the state changed. There was a lot more people working in the war industries. They liked California. They came, my father during Korea, he liked the fact that he can go through a December without having to shovel snow like he had to in South Dakota. So what they were doing was, like at the National Guard Airfield in Griffith Park, they put hundreds of these Quonset huts that they had at Port Hueneme. And they divide it in half and have a 2-bedroom apartment on one end and a 2-bedroom apartment on the other end. And this is where soldiers who were married could live while they got reestablished in their communities and could find a housing or go to school or find a civilian job. The VA provided this. And, in Morro Bay, these were the type of huts that they had at Morro Bay at the amphibious training base. And of course, the Veterans Administration hospitals. Up here in Sacramento, we have a huge one. There's an even larger one at Travis Air Force Base that's run jointly by the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Air Force. They do a pretty good job. I have no complaints with them. But this is where, and the Army actually built hospitals with the plan, thinking that we would have to invade Japan, which would have resulted in hundreds of thousands of casualties, probably within days of the first landing. They built hospitals, these 2,000 bed hospitals. There were some in the Valley, some in Los Angeles, up here in Auburn, that were planned to be at the end of the war, were going to be transferred to the Veterans Administration to carry on treating these soldiers until they could be released. They were expecting that many casualties, that a lot of these hospitals weren't fully utilized. And some of them were built as permanent hospitals, thinking that they would have to be used as, providing lifetime support for people who were wounded in the war. After the war, they became state hospitals, like in DeWitt General Hospital in Auburn. Some became college campuses. Merced, the junior college in Merced was one of those hospitals. And you can go over there and still see some of the World War II barracks. Birmingham General Hospital became Birmingham High School. The Navy had convalescent centers at Santa Cruz and Yosemite's, all the big resorts at those two locations were Navy, convalescent hospitals. If a lot of hotels were turned into 1,000 and 2,000 bed hospitals, and they're still around today. And you look at their history, and there's a lot of you look at their history. There was a lot of these big resort hotels in Pasadena, in places Norco, that were used as these huge hospitals. And that completes my brief. Now, a couple of things I didn't bring up, because this is normally one that's given for the whole, throughout the state. But Camp San Luis Obispo was more than just Camp San Luis Obispo. It actually went from where you see it today. East facility of the men's colony was all troop housing, and went all the way past. It ended at where the rifle ranges are along Highway 101. But that's not all. They had the Baywood Park. They doubled the size of the camp maneuver area, the Baywood Park maneuver area out in Los Osos. So the sand spit and all that area what is now Los Osos was maneuver area. And that's why you can go out to the sand spit and find cartridges. The Navy also put where the power plant was the amphibious training base, Morro Bay, where they trained troops at Camp San Luis Obispo. And they were, and they did assault landings at Avila Beach. You see the huge LSTs, the big landing craft, discharging tanks at Avila Beach, where I played, and John probably did too, where those of us who were from here played when we were kids on the beach. In 1943, you couldn't go to the beach because there was probably tanks all over it. There was, they did assault landings on the sand spit. They attacked Atascadero Beach. It shows there's a great picture of a Corsair flying over an assault force that's landing on Atascadero Beach. There is also, they had the Pismo Beach Recreation Camp across the street from where the Butterfly Grove is. That was a place where soldiers who needed to take time off, who had maybe just come back from combat, they wanted to give them a couple of weeks off, so they sent them to Pismo Beach for a week to relax and not have to be in the regimented atmosphere of a military installation. I also didn't brief on, because I see that my good friend Colonel Eric Brune is listening to this. There was the African American experience here in San Luis Obispo. For the most part, San Luis Obispo was pretty tolerant of the African Americans at Camp San Luis Obispo, and also the 54th Coast Artillery. But there were some incidents. But I think it speaks well of where I've been stationed in the South, at Fort Jackson, Camp Shelby, and the African, and you do the, I, being a history junkie, I did the history of the camp and figured out where everything was during World War II. And the African American USO was never downtown. It was as far out of downtown as they could get. San Luis Obispo, I think it speaks volumes that they put it downtown. They actually had a better location than the white USO up on Santa Rosa Street. The one USO was located across from the old City County Library on Palm Street. But I'm not going to speak much, because I'm sure that my good friend Colonel Brune is going to be giving you a full presentation on the African American experience here during the war in San Luis Obispo. At this time, I guess I can take questions. So what do we have?
Yeah, thank you, Dan. There was one question I just wanted to make sure you answered right up front. I think I'd emailed it to you from I'm not sure she's attending tonight, but Marilyn Darnell wanted to know how many of the GIs that were trained at Camp San Luis during the war would have been, Central Coast residents. And
I answered.
You did.
I answered that because the National Guard didn't have a unit in San Luis Obispo County. You know, so it would have just been the average person. The nearest unit was A Battery, 144th Field Artillery in Santa Maria. The other nearest unit was the 40th Tank Company in Salinas.
So
Neither unit mobilized at Camp San Luis Obispo. The 144th went to Fort Lewis. The 40th Tank Company went to the Philippines. So the only nearest unit that was here during World War II would have been the 185th Infantry, which had their headquarters in Fresno. And back then, no one was going to drive to Fresno at that time, National Guard drills were like Tuesday night, every Tuesday night. And they didn't do it on the weekend. So there were actually very few National Guardsmen in San Luis Obispo County.
Okay, well, let's open it up and ask if people would like to ask a question. Unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up. Raise your hand if you like. I think I see Joe Morris maybe waving his hand. I'm not sure. He hasn't unmuted himself, but I know Joe is one of those people who's going to be leading. In fact, he's going to be leading the first event during World War II Commemoration Week, which I'll talk about in a few minutes, but I want to just make sure people have the chance to ask questions. John Villa, do you have a question for Dan?
Tell me the significance of Sycamore Street.
I
used to know it. I can't remember it.
It used to be Walnut Street. That's where all the whorehouses were.
Okay.
Okay. And the freeway went right through
it. Right by it.
Yeah. So, okay. There are stories about that. Go ahead, Joe. Joe, we still can't hear you. Try modifying your settings for your microphone to see if you can be heard. If not, if that doesn't work, I suggest go ahead and put your question in the chat window. That also will work to make sure you can communicate. But we can't hear you is a problem right now. Keep trying, and when we do hear you, we'll chime in. Meanwhile.
Yeah, so I'm going to encourage folks to definitely make use of the chat box if that's something you want to be able to spend some time crafting your question.
Did you have anything to add?
I wanted to ask real quick, if you don't mind. You mentioned the USS California was nicknamed the Prune Barge. Yep. There's got to be a story there.
What was California? One of the fruits California was famous for? Prunes.
And that was one of the first ships sunk in Manila Bay, was it?
No, it was sunk at Pearl Harbor, and it was attacked by a kamikaze at Lingayen Gulf in the northern Philippines, where the Japanese had invaded, 3 years before.
Oh, okay. My timeline is a little mixed up on that. That was called the USS California. It was not a warship, though. It was not a battleship.
It was a battleship.
It was a battleship. Okay.
The only battleship built on the West Coast. It was built at Mare Island Naval Shipyard.
Okay. Thomas, if you're monitoring the chat window, I don't see anybody weighing in on chat here.
Yeah, it looks like David asked some questions about the use of prisoner of war labor and whether they were paid.
Yes. We paid them. We fed them the same rations as our soldiers ate. If they could find ethnic food for the Italians and the Germans, they did. The Germans, a lot of Germans came back and Italians came back after the war, after they were repatriated and settled near the prisoner of war camps that they were stationed at. The Italians loved it. Again, treated better here than they were in their own army. And they could go to the movies, some of them dated local girls. My mother remembered seeing the Italians all over downtown San Luis Obispo.
Matter of fact, I'm going to try to find a picture to share it here of that Italian memorial on the parade ground in Camp San Luis Obispo, the Italian rock, which is one of the first things you see in there. Go ahead and keep talking. I'll try to find that so I can share that.
Well, we have an exhibit in our downstairs area of our museum that an intern made about the Italian rock, and I think You got to see that the last time you visited our museum, Dan?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I'm coming down next in a couple of weeks. I'll make a purpose. I'll stop by and take a look at it.
Excellent. Yeah, we have had some absolutely wonderful interns create some great exhibits, and that is one of them that goes into a little bit more depth on that story.
I see Colonel Bruin shopping. Colonel, do you have anything that you'd like to add real quick? Oh, you got your mask.
Yeah,
on.
no, I certainly enjoy your travel log, Dan. The one story, I was in the Arizona Guard for 6 years, and the POW escaped there were almost all officers. Actually, they were all officers. They came from that part of the camp. But we had annual reunions of the guards and the POWs. They would fly in from Germany in vacation there in Phoenix for many years.
Yeah, and one thing that I failed to mention was that when the Italians changed sides, there were about 10% of the hardcore fascists that they did not allow to join and they just threw them in with the Germans. These are primarily, again, officers who were diehard fascists. That they were sent. They stayed in the base camps behind barbed wire and were watched very closely. They figured out really quickly who was a diehard fascist and who was a draftee who didn't want to be there in the first place. And the Italians, they were diming out their officers as being fascists. And so about 90% of them were very happy to make that transition.
Dan, would you like to talk about the Italian rock here?
Yeah, here's the Italian rock. Looks like I have to have it painted again.
Oh, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, so this is from the 15th Italian light equipment maintenance company. We know the 15 with the ordnance bomb is the insignia for the Ordnance Corps, made in 1944. This is a pretty recent picture, the new fences.
I took it in October, and you can see the gate to Camp San Luis behind it, and the hillside with the eagle that is visible from Highway 1.
Okay, so a little history about the eagle. My father was the corporal in charge of all the people being punished, and they hauled rocks out of Dairy Creek up there. And at that time, it was cross flags and a torch, the signal that it was the emblem of the Signal Corps, and it had SWSTC below it, or Southwest Signal Training Center. In '65, the California Military Academy, which was the National Guard's Officer Candidate Program, reconfigured it as an eagle. And it's the largest dynamic piece of art in the county because the rocks at the bottom are often changed depending on who's graduating, what course, what unit is doing their 2-week active duty there. In this case, it says 132 for the 132nd Engineer Company who came up, who was doing their annual training, rehabbing the ranges. We just had a command sergeant major pass away, and they put CSM under the eagle. And like I said, it changes sometimes on a weekly basis or a monthly basis. It's whoever wants to go up there and rearrange the bottom rocks. It's so, like I said, it's always something new.
So Dan, it's no longer done just as a KP, huh?
No, we actually have a contract dining facility. No one unless you're in the field. No, KP is it wastes training time.
Yeah. And let me ask you, Dan, to comment on how people might be able to get to see. I'm holding up here this historical driving tour that you guys published, and it's a well-kept secret. And of course, the base, it's problematic right now because of conditions in Ukraine, I'm sure, to get access to the base to take a tour like this. But go ahead and tell us what might be possible for.
Usually they just stop you, want to see picture ID. If you're not military or they don't know you, they're going to want to see proof of insurance and IDs for any adults in the car.
Well, so it is possible just to drive right up and ask to take the
Yeah,
tour.
you can ask. Again,
Yeah.
I haven't been there for 3 weeks,
Yes,
so I don't know what, I don't know what's going on now.
Yeah.
Usually I stop,
Yeah.
they recognize me and give me the wave through.
uh-huh.
Yeah, I haven't noticed any increased security levels, so.
Yeah, and I was at our headquarters yesterday, and we're tied to Ukraine. We have a bilateral agreement with Ukraine. We have people talking to them on a daily basis, and we didn't have any additional security at our headquarters.
Yeah, the commander, I think you mentioned to me, the commander there, Brian Windsor, Lieutenant Colonel Brian Windsor, is a Ukrainian subject matter expert.
Yeah, and I was the first joint exercise between American forces and the Ukraine armed forces was held in 1997 at Camp San Luis Obispo.
Yeah. So
They had 300 Ukrainians fly in under their with a deputy minister of defense, who's a 3-star general, still in their Soviet Red Army uniforms, and it was a training challenge because their system was so different than ours. They didn't have non-commissioned officers. They were shocked that I was a company first sergeant of the unit there. And well, how many officers do you have to manage your 200 soldier unit? And I said, we're short officers. I only have 1 officer. Well, what happens when he's gone? I run the company. And what? But you're not an officer. But I'm the first sergeant. They were so the Red Army methods were so ingrained, where they had officers doing sergeants' work, that they couldn't wrap their head around that the company sometimes operated better without the officers there. And it was just a total shock. Now it's different. And I saw what I saw because the Russian military attaché, then they had this phony Commonwealth of Independent States. They were trying to keep some toehold over their former republics. They flew out a Russian 2-star. And when he got to Camp San Luis, everyone was down at Pearly Theater for a briefing, 300 Ukrainians, 400 Americans. And when he got out of the van, every Ukrainian did an about face and turned their back to him.
Wow.
That's how much they hated the Russians.
What, that would have been 91, 30 years
87.
ago. Oh my God.
97.
Let me ask you, Dan, if I might, and anybody who wants to weigh in and speak up, feel free, please. But would it be fair to say that the Central Coast has always punched above our weight class on military affairs, as we have on so many others? I mean, Cal Poly is an excellent academic institution, but go ahead.
Let's talk. Let's start off with Santa Barbara County. You had Marine Corps Air Station Santa Barbara, where the airport is. You had Camp Cook, which was where they trained armored divisions. Now Vandenberg Space Force Base.
Yeah.
You had Santa Maria Army Airfield, which was a bomber base. You had some small facilities at Avila Beach. You had the rec camp at Pismo Beach. Camp San Luis Obispo, Morro Bay, Los Osos training camp areas. Going over the grade, at Cambria, you had a air defense radar, even in the same place where the old Cambria Air Force Station is. When you go over the grade, you had Naval Air Station San Luis Obispo, where Chesney Field was a sub base of Alameda Naval Air Station.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. For those of us who remember the old airport, all those steel buildings that were out where the old terminal is, well, the second terminal, where the weights and measures and the Navy Reserve was, those were left over from World War II. And the big light that rotated when it was a tripod, the Navy built that.
Okay.
I've been told that the old log cabin was the rec center for the sailors stationed at Naval Auxiliary Air Station, San Luis Obispo.
That might
You
explain.
had Sherwood Field out in east of Paso Robles, past the airport. What's that little town when you go over that big overpass?
Estrella.
Huh?
Estrella?
Estrella.
Yeah.
No. Estrella Army Air Force Base is the airport, but there was another smaller one out that was a naval emergency landing field. But before that, it was a home for the California National Guard's 115th Observation Squadron that they flew out of there during their training until they got separated from the division and sent to Salinas Army Air Base. Going over the up 101, you had Hunter Liggett Military Reservation, which was the Camp Roberts, and then the military Hunter Liggett, which was a huge maneuver area. And Camp Roberts was the largest basic training center in the United States. You had an infantry training, replacement training center on the main, what is now the main post, but on the other side, where East Garrison is, where the equipment storage site is, was a field artillery replacement training center with 2 regiments, and they had like 7 regiments of infantry on the main base. It was huge, and it had the largest paved parade ground in the world. It's 1.5 miles long by half a mile wide. Well, it used to be if you walk during the summer, if you tried to walk across it, you'd be charged with an offense because a lot of people, it was so hot, the heat coming off the asphalt, people would drop from dehydration just trying to walk across the parade ground.
Yeah.
So
We and Dan, I don't know if we noted, but you have just been promoted to be the director of the military museums for the National Guard. Does that include Camp Roberts?
yes,
So
we have a museum at Joint Forces Base Los Alamitos. We have one. Camp Roberts operates independently because they have their own 501c3, but their artifact, I oversee their artifacts. We're going to be having a museum at our new headquarters at Mather Field, and we're going to be establishing a museum support center in Lodi. We're taking over the National Guard Armory there and putting a Northern California Museum Support Center. That's where I'll move right now we're at North Highlands Air National Guard Station, and that they're closing that station next year. And so I'm moving the operations to Lodi. Either way, it's a 30-minute drive for me. So,
but people should know that you're here in this county once a month, generally the middle of the month.
mm-hmm.
And our hope is that you'll be able to conduct a guided tour of Camp San Luis Obispo.
Yeah, we'll try to make something happen here.
Yeah, April, May.
Yeah.
Sometime soon.
Yeah, we also have right now 5, soon to be 8 regimental room mini museums at each of our combat arms battalions. We have partnerships with Clovis Veterans Memorial District, Heroes Hall at the Orange County Fairgrounds, Palm Springs Air Museum, Fort MacArthur. You guys have an outstanding Veterans Museum, and we've made artifact transfers to them for some of their weapons.
And I'm just going to flip through a couple of the photographs here on these slides that do show what people can see at Camp San Luis Obispo. There's a close-up of that. What do we call that? The Eagle?
The Eagle. That's all we call it, is the Eagle.
This is the actual historic plaque that was that's still there on the gate of Camp San Luis Obispo.
And I remember when they moved this in 1986. I was working at the United States Property and Fiscal Office on the camp. This is off the old. We still have a remnant of the old Highway 1 on the camp, and this was over there in the eucalyptus area, halfway between the main gate and the west facility of the men's colony. And I still try to figure out how the heck did they load this up and dig it out and load it up and reinstall it at the main gate, the current main gate.
Maybe they used some Italian prisoners.
Who knows?
I have a question, Dan.
Yeah.
So there's John there.
Yeah.
Hey, is it true that most of the oil from the San Joaquin Valley went to Port San Luis?
Port San Luis and Estero Bay.
So, but
Yeah,
well, the
yeah,
oil
that's
goes
why they
on.
had the oil tanks on Tank Farm Road
Yeah,
and above Avila Beach, and they had the, remember growing up, you used to see the standard oil tankers sitting off of Estero Bay.
yes.
They had a pumping station that was, instead of having a pier, they just had a buoy out there that they hooked up to. But yeah, they were there at Estero Bay and
Yeah.
Port San Luis.
And that's why the
Yeah.
Japanese targeted the SS Montebello.
Yeah, it had left Port San Luis going up to Richmond for
Yeah.
to be processed.
Eric, did
Yeah,
you?
that-
Jim Andre here. I wanted to ask a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dan, thank you so much for the presentation. Is Camp San Luis, I mean, now Cuesta College is there. When I was a kid, some of the ranchers would raise cattle there. I remember helping round them up. But what is actively operating there today? Is there any National Guard or
Yeah.
active military?
By the way, are you any relation to Peter Andre?
Yeah, Pete was my dad.
Okay, yeah. Your dad and my dad knew each other.
Oh, great. Well, if you haven't read my dad's memoirs, he writes a lot about the war. I'd love to get you a copy. I'll try to get that to you. And I have a bunch of stuff at home I may be able to donate to your collections. Thanks.
So what's going on at Camp San Luis today? So it is still an active installation. It's primarily a schoolhouse. Cal Fire has their one of their training academies there. We have the Office of Emergency Services has their California Specialized Training Institute that does a lot of disaster management training there. It's one of the leaders in that field nationwide. On the military side, we have the 223rd Regional Training Institute Regiment, which is has the Officer Candidate School, and they run a multi-component military police school, transportation school, medics course year-round. And it's not only for National Guards, but it's for regular Army, Army reservists, and some foreign troops. For the regulars in the National Guard is for people who are reclassifying to new jobs. Because they want you to take your first one at the main schoolhouse back east. But if you're reclassifying into a new job, you're going to be a truck driver, an MP, or a medic. Everyone west of the Rockies goes to Camp San Luis Obispo, and those are year-round courses.
Oh,
That's why you
great.
see on that one big paved area along Highway 1, those trucks that are out there parked because they do the training there, how to load with the palletized loading system, and they run trucks up and through the hills, and there's a wash point.
Oh, that's great.
And then there's the youth programs. You have the Grizzly Academy that's there.
Mhm.
The
Year-round,
History Center,
residential.
I'm sorry,
California
Thomas.
the California Cadet Corps has their headquarters there, which is the secondary school in-school program I think they're at like 90 locations. It's older than ROTC, and they're programmed to go into middle schools also. So that's why some school districts opt for Cadet Corps, California Cadet Corps versus ROTC. And then we have all the cyber defense. Cal Poly has their cyber defense center there, and so does the district attorney has their cyber investigations unit there.
I had no idea.
So there's
they
still a
had
lot of
there.
stuff going on at Camp San Luis Obispo.
By the way, what did your dad do?
My dad
Where
was,
did he live?
his name was Ernie Sebby. Your dad was a contractor, correct?
No,
Attorney.
he was a lawyer.
Oh, attorney. So,
Attorney.
okay, I got people mixed up. Your father was my grandparents' attorney, Joaquin and Edna Machado.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, he had a lot of clients who were ranchers and farmers. I know that.
Yeah, that you just picked, every Portuguese, this rancher on this side of the Western Grade was my cousin.
And Peter Andre was the one who founded the Historical Society of San Luis Obispo County, which
Okay.
is now known as the History Center. And we, by the way, are also a tenant at Camp San Luis Obispo.
That's
We
right.
have a storage
Oh, yeah,
unit.
Yeah,
That's
the
right.
Conservation Corps is out there too.
That's right. Yeah.
So yeah,
Um,
there's my F4 that I'm going to be moving to Sacramento this fall.
Yeah, and you were commanded to do that. Is that correct?
The Air Force wants it off of Camp San Luis because we're not an Air Force installation. They're still trying to figure out how it got there in the first place.
Well, I imagine you know, but you're not going to tell anybody.
Yeah, but it's going to look very nice in front of our new headquarters. Okay, this
This is a really-
sculpture here that you see, that is from the 1939. That was the National Guard Memorial that was sculpted in San Francisco for the 1939 World's Fair. And it commemorates the 20th anniversary of the ending of World War I.
Yeah, it's
It's some of our artwork that we have. The chapel is still configured. It was one of 8 chapels. And if you go to the Episcopal Chapel Church in Los Osos, the Lutheran Church in San Luis Obispo that I was raised in, and there's probably a couple other ones. I think there's one in Grover City. These were all chapels from Camp San Luis.
And they were well built, obviously.
Yeah, you go in there, it's all clear heart redwood and #1 Doug fir.
Yeah. There's a better
And that's
picture.
why at Camp Roberts, when they were tearing down the barracks, the old barracks a few years ago, they didn't pay to have those torn down. They were requesting bids. The people who were tearing them down had to pay for the right because they could salvage the lumber. Because this was like kiln dried clear heart Doug fir #1 and clear heart redwood. So they were recycling that wood. So
the military added that.
Camp Roberts didn't cost the government a penny.
And this is available as a wedding venue too. You can see wheelchair accessibility there now, and very well maintained. Could you mention, Dan, too, if people wanted to get access up the mountain there, Chumash Peak in the background there is owned by the base as well.
Yeah, don't do it. That's all I gotta say. It is poison ivy, poison oak everywhere. We
Okay.
did an event a few years ago that they went up the trail, and it was not something that was well thought out.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Those of us who know this area know the poison oak. Cal
Yeah.
Poly students don't.
Yeah, stick to Bishop Peak Trail, which the city
Yeah.
maintains pretty clear of poison oak. Well, this has been terrific. I don't know if there are any other questions that people have here. If so, again, speak your piece or put a, Thomas, do we have anything else in the chat window?
Nope, looks like everything was good.
Okay. Well, I think it is just approaching 7 o'clock here, which is normally when we try to end this thing. I just want to make sure everybody knows that stay tuned, please. In the end of April, World War II Commemoration Week will be proclaimed. So far, the county of San Luis Obispo, the city of Arroyo Grande, the city of San Luis Obispo, and the city of Paso Robles have all agreed to agendize a proclamation where we're going to be reflecting on the fact that it was 80 years ago in the month of April that this area and throughout the Central Coast, we completely transformed the economy and the population and the whole psychology of the Central Coast changed so that we went to war big time, unified. And although, of course, part of that was interning the Japanese American neighbors, and many of those families were never able to come back, never able to recover. But there are some great stories. We're going to tell one story each day. Beginning Sunday, Joe Morris is going to do a tour of downtown San Luis Obispo, starting at the Ludwig Center, which was the USO Hall on Santa Rosa, the white USO. We should make sure that distinction is. And Joe is going to also talk about a few other places, including the 1941 courthouse, the Fremont Theater, where bond sales were held, and so on. And then the next 6 days, we're going to have one event every single day. If you can't make any of those events, I encourage you just to come into the History Center. We've got all these books about World War II. Here's a book, The Sinking of the Montebello by Stuart McDowell. Stuart McDowell is going to be coming to Morro Bay. We're going to have a joint event sponsored with the Morro Bay Historical Society featuring Stuart McDowell. He'll sign books for you there if you want. He'll tell about the story of the SS Montebello. Jim Gregory, who has written several books on World War II, here are just two of them, Central Coast Aviators in World War II, World War II Arroyo Grande. Jim is gonna, with the South County Historical Society, we're gonna hold at least 2 events in South County. 3, if I can arrange for the story of the Filipino 1st and 2nd regiments there. Eric Brun is helping us to arrange that with one of the Filipino scouts from Oxford. He's going to be driving up, and we're going to screen a film called Untold Triumph in Grover Beach, we hope, which was the center of the Filipino community in this county, at Filipino American community, I should say, in the war. And that's a great story. It's a fine film. It just came out a few years ago. It deserves to be seen more often by more people in this county. And then finally, at the end of the week, we're going to have James Papp giving a tour of Japantown for anybody who wants to come. And then at noon, we're going to have our award ceremony with the author of this book. 2 of the 3 authors, Dan and Elizabeth Creeper, wrote a book in 1996 called War Comes to the Middle Kingdom. You can get this too in our bookstore. And you can also get a copy of La Vista, which has an article by Dan Sebby in it about some of the property that was acquired in order to create Camp San Luis Obispo, the Chavez home and the Turi Ranch and the Cheda family, all kinds of mostly Swiss Italian families. I think that the Manini family set us up. Is that, Dan, you want to follow that up with a couple?
Yeah,
more?
well, if you go by Camp San Luis Obispo, across from the freeway from our headquarters, there's a grove of eucalyptus, and that's where the elementary school was. They moved to Morro Bay. That's the elementary school that Alex Madonna went to growing up.
Right, that's fascinating, and so much of what we can see from the highway, or if you drive into Cuesta College, there's even more to see. And if you're playing golf out at Rancho El Chorro Regional Park, so much of the presence of modern facilities there today we can credit to the introduction of that infrastructure during World War II. Our water system in the city of San Luis Obispo, a good part of it was built during World War II very rapidly. In order to serve Camp San Luis Obispo. That's called Salinas Reservoir, and the Cuesta water line that serves, they drove a tunnel right through Cuesta Grade, and that water still supplies now part of the base, Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo.
And the Army still owns it.
And the Army still owns it. The city would like to get it, but that's probably not going to happen.
So if anyone wants to find out more, we have a very good website.
Yes.
At militarymuseum.org.
I will.
And if you'd like to get in touch with me, when you get to militarymuseum.org, we have a directory, the table of contents, and at the bottom is the directory of who runs the program. And you click my name and it'll take you to my email address. But if you just want, it's daniel.sebby, SEBBY, at cmd.ca.gov.
I'm going to put that in the chat window here if anybody wants to see that. Dan.Sebby.
I'll put it in.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I think we've had a couple of people saying that they appreciate your presentation. I'm sure everybody who's still here and those who may have had to leave early also appreciate the work you put in for this, Dan. And the hope is we'll have a good number of people turn out when we're able to schedule that tour of the base. Let's hope things that are taking place now out in Eastern Europe are cooled off by the time we have World War II Commemoration Week, hopefully earlier, because if it stays hot out there any length of time, it's going to get very hot, I'm afraid. And this is why we have the military, the modern military we have today, and Camp San Luis Obispo. And all of the people who serve in this county, all the people who have served, we should mention the Veterans Museum as well. That's
outstanding museum.
It really is. It's at the Veterans Museum, at the Veterans Memorial Building on Grand Avenue near Cal Poly. There are lots of military museums where you can learn about World War II here. The Maritime Museum in Morro Bay, Camp Roberts, the Estrella Warbirds Museum, any of the museums down in South County too that Jim Gregory manages. So Lots of places to keep up your interest in military history in general, or World War II in particular. But Dan I've found him to be very accessible. We're going to hear more from Dan and from Eric Brun and from Jim Gregory and from Joe Morris and some of the other people that have been involved here. If any of you who are still on this Zoom are interested in joining the History Center, particularly volunteering for us, maybe even joining our board, we'd love to have you. So any final words from you, Thomas, here as we close up? See, he's muted. There he is.
No,
Thank you, Dan.
thank you everybody for joining us.
My pleasure.
And we're so happy to have had such a great turnout. And I hope everybody has a wonderful evening.
Thank you all.
Hey, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everybody.